The sack of flour rested beside the wagon like it was worth more than the girl standing next to it. No one in Dry Creek said a word, not the men unloading barrels outside the trading post. Not the women carrying baskets across the dusty street. Not even the storekeeper, who kept his eyes fixed on his ledger as though numbers were easier to face than people. 19-year-old Clara Bennett stood perfectly still, her worn dress fluttering in the dry wind. She didn't cry. She had learned years ago that tears only made her mother angry. Her mother tightened the reins on the old mule. "I've paid what I owed," Martha Bennett said to the merchant. "The flour's mine." The merchant nodded once. "And the girl? You said your cousin needed another pair of hands." Martha didn't even look at Clara. "She's strong enough." Clara waited. She knew deep inside that her mother would turn around, that she would say she'd made a mistake. Instead, Martha climbed onto the wagon. "You've eaten enough under my roof." The wagon wheels rolled forward. Clara took one step after it. "Mother," the wagon never slowed. Dust swallowed it before her voice did. Silence settled over the street. The merchant cleared his throat. "My cousin changed his mind this morning." Clara blinked. "What? He hired somebody else?" She stared at him, confused. "But my mother," he rubbed the back of his neck. "She still wanted the flour." The meaning reached her slowly. There had never been another job. There had only been the debt. The merchant pushed a small cloth bundle toward her. "There's a biscuit." She didn't move. "I can't feed another mouth," he muttered, already turning away. Within moments, everyone returned to their business. The town had witnessed something terrible and decided it wasn't their concern. By afternoon, the summer heat wrapped around the empty streets. Clara sat beneath the shade of an old cottonwood tree behind the church, hugging her knees. She owned exactly 3 things now: a faded shawl, a small tin comb, and the wooden locket her father had carved before fever carried him away 11 years earlier. Everything else had belonged to the cabin she'd never see again. The church bell rang softly. An elderly woman stepped outside carrying a basket of folded blankets. She paused. "You look hungry." Clara forced a smile. "I'll be all right." The woman hesitated, then sighed. "The church pantry's nearly empty." "I understand," because she did. Everybody in Dry Creek was struggling. Harvests had failed. Prices kept rising. People protected what little they had. Kindness had become expensive. The woman touched Clara's shoulder gently before walking away. It was the first kind touch Clara had felt in months. It nearly broke her. As evening settled over the valley, wagons returned from distant fields while riders guided tired cattle toward nearby ranches. Clara wandered without purpose. She wasn't looking for charity. "Only work at the blacksmith shop?" She asked if he needed floors swept. "No." "At the boarding house, no vacancies." "At the schoolhouse, we've already hired someone." Every answer sounded the same. "Not today, maybe next season. Try another town." By sunset, her stomach ached so sharply she leaned against the hitching rail outside the general store. A little boy dropped an apple while climbing into his father's wagon. Before anyone noticed, Clara picked it up and brushed away the dust. "Sir," the farmer turned. "You dropped this." He looked surprised. "You could have kept it. It isn't mine." He smiled faintly before handing the apple back to his son. "Thank you." The wagon rolled away. The boy looked over his shoulder and waved. Clara smiled back, then continued walking with an empty stomach. Several miles outside town, rows of fencing stretched across rolling grasslands where cattle grazed beneath the fading sky. Maple Ridge Ranch wasn't the biggest property in the territory, but travelers often spoke about how orderly it was. Nothing seemed wasted there, not grain, not lumber, not effort. Its owner, Daniel Mercer, believed broken things deserved repair before replacement. The same applied to fences, tools, horses, and sometimes people. At 36, Daniel had never been known as the loudest man in the county. His ranch hands respected him because he listened more than he spoke. He paid fairly, expected honesty, and never asked anyone to do work he wouldn't do himself. That evening, he rode into Dry Creek to collect horseshoes from the blacksmith. Instead, he found the shop already closed. He sighed. "Tomorrow then?" Turning his horse toward home, he passed the church. Near the steps sat a young woman, asleep despite the evening chill. Her head rested against a wooden post. One hand still clutched a tiny carved locket. Daniel slowed his horse. She looked exhausted, not drunk, not careless, simply worn out. Past experience told him not to interfere in strangers' troubles. Still, something about the way she'd folded herself into the corner, trying to take up as little space as possible, stayed with him. The church door opened. Reverend Collins stepped outside carrying a lantern. Daniel tipped his hat. "Evening," the Reverend nodded. "Evening." Daniel glanced toward the sleeping girl. "Family nearby?" The older man shook his head. "Not anymore." He quietly explained what had happened that morning. Daniel listened without interrupting. When the story ended, he looked toward Clara again. "So she's alone?" "I'm afraid so." Daniel remained silent for several seconds. "I could leave some money." The Reverend smiled sadly. "Money fills a stomach, but it doesn't answer tomorrow." Daniel understood. He thanked the Reverend and rode away, yet the image of the sleeping girl followed him all the way home. Morning sunlight spread across the ranch as workers gathered near the barn. Daniel studied a broken wagon axle while his foreman, Elias, read through supply notes. "We're still short one dependable hand in the cookhouse," Elias said. "The last helper left." Daniel nodded absent-mindedly. "We'll manage. You've been saying that for 3 weeks." Daniel looked toward the distant hills, then asked quietly, "Would you hire someone with no references?" Elias frowned. "Depends on what, whether they needed a chance or caused trouble everywhere else." Daniel considered that answer. After breakfast, he saddled his horse again. Instead of riding toward the grazing fields, he turned back toward Dry Creek. Clara had spent the night on the church porch. She woke before sunrise, embarrassed that anyone might see her there. The Reverend offered her a cup of weak coffee. She thanked him. "I'm going to keep looking." "For work," she nodded. "I have to. What if nobody hires you today?" She looked down into the empty cup. "Then I'll try again tomorrow." There wasn't bitterness in her voice, only quiet determination. The Reverend watched her walk toward the main street. Halfway there, a rider approached at an easy pace. He wasn't dressed like a wealthy cattle baron. His shirt sleeves were rolled. His boots were dusty. His hat showed years of use. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Miss," Clara looked up cautiously. "Yes, my name's Daniel Mercer." She waited. "I heard you've been searching for work." Her shoulders stiffened. "If this is pity..." "It isn't." She said nothing. Daniel rested one hand on the saddle horn. Then asked the one question no one else had bothered to ask. "What kind of work are you proud of doing?" The question caught her completely off guard. No one had asked what she could do. Only whether she was worth feeding. For a long moment she couldn't answer. Then she swallowed hard. I keep things running." He didn't interrupt. "I cook simple meals. I mend clothes. I can milk cows. I've helped during harvest. I keep records if someone reads them aloud," and her voice became smaller. "I finish what I start." Daniel nodded once, not impressed, not doubtful, just listening for the first time since the wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust. Clara felt like someone was speaking to a person, not a burden. Daniel Mercer did not offer Clara a promise. He did not tell her everything would suddenly become easy. He had lived long enough to know that words were often the cheapest thing a person could give. Instead, he simply said, "Maple Ridge Ranch needs someone who can help in the cookhouse and keep track of supplies." Clara studied his face carefully. She was waiting for the hidden cost. There was always a hidden cost. "Why?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Why what? Why would you hire me?" It was not an angry question. It was a tired one. The kind of question asked by someone who had spent years wondering why anyone would choose them. Daniel looked toward the busy street, then back at her. "Because you answered my question." Clara frowned. "What question? What kind of work are you proud of doing?" She looked away. "That doesn't mean I can do it well." "No." Daniel paused. "It means you know the value of it." Those words stayed with her, not because they were grand, not because they fixed anything, but because nobody had ever spoken to her as if her effort mattered. The ride to Maple Ridge Ranch was quiet. Clara sat in the wagon beside a small stack of supplies Daniel had purchased from town. She kept her hands folded in her lap. Daniel noticed she barely looked around. Most people seeing Maple Ridge for the first time would stare at the wide fields, the large barn, or the rows of healthy crops. Clara looked at the ground. "You don't have to apologize for being here," Daniel said, her eyes lifted. "I wasn't going to," he almost smiled. "Good," she looked surprised. "Most people apologize when they think they're taking up space." The words hit closer than she expected. "I don't want to be a problem." Daniel guided the horses down the ranch road. "Then don't be," she looked at him. "That's it, that's it." A small silence followed, then Daniel added, "Everyone here earns their place." Clara looked toward the ranch buildings ahead. "And if I can't?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He considered his words carefully. "Then we figure out what you can do." It was such a simple answer. But Clara had never heard anyone say it before. The ranch hands noticed her arrival, not because she caused a scene, because she tried very hard not to. Elias, the foreman, removed his hat politely. "This is Clara Bennett." The older man looked at Daniel. "Another helper?" "Yes." Elias nodded. No questions, no judgment. That surprised her. Daniel showed her the small room beside the cookhouse. It was not fancy, a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, a small window facing the fields, but it had a door that locked. Clara stood inside silently. Daniel waited outside. "You can change anything you need." She looked back. "Anything? Within reason." She touched the edge of the blanket. Nobody had ever told her a place was hers, not even temporarily. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, then walked away. He did not wait for a bigger thank you. He did not expect gratitude. That confused her more than anything. The first week at Maple Ridge was difficult. Not because anyone was cruel, that almost made it harder. Clara knew how to survive anger. She knew how to survive disappointment. But kindness made her nervous. On her first morning, she woke before everyone else and cleaned the kitchen from top to bottom. When the cook, Mrs. Whitaker, arrived, she stared at the spotless counters. "You did this?" Clara nodded. "I hope that's all right." The older woman placed her hands on her hips. "Girl, I wasn't asking because I was upset." Clara lowered her eyes. "I know, but Mrs. Whitaker noticed something." Clara always expected the worst. When a plate slipped from her hand, she immediately apologized. When she asked where supplies were kept, she apologized. When she sat at the end of the table during meals, she apologized. After several days, Mrs. Whitaker finally put down her fork. "Clara, yes, do you realize you say sorry more than you say your own name?" Clara froze. "I didn't know." The older woman sighed softly. "Well, now you do." Small things began changing. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone in town would write about, but Clara noticed. Daniel always knocked before entering the cookhouse, always, even when he owned the ranch, even when he was in a hurry. The first time she opened the door and saw him waiting outside, she stared. "You don't have to wait." "I know." "Then why do you?" "Because it's your space." Again, simple words. Again, something she wasn't used to. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the valley. The ranch workers rushed to secure equipment and cover supplies. Clara noticed one of the storage sheds had a damaged roof. Rainwater was dripping onto several sacks of grain. Without waiting, she grabbed a ladder. A ranch hand named Thomas saw her. "What are you doing?" "Saving the grain." Daniel told everyone to wait until the wind settles. Clara looked at the leaking roof. "Then we should probably tell him the grain won't wait." Thomas stared, then laughed. "Fair enough." Together they moved the supplies. Later that evening, Daniel inspected the storage room. Elias shook his head. "Your new helper saved half the feed." Daniel looked toward Clara, who was quietly washing dishes. "Did she?" Clara turned. "I just moved some things." Daniel walked over. "You noticed a problem and fixed it." She shrugged. "Anyone would have done it." "No." He looked around the room. "Not everyone does." The compliment made her uncomfortable. She turned back to the dishes, but Daniel saw the smallest smile. Weeks passed. Clara learned the rhythms of the ranch. She learned which horse disliked strangers, which worker liked extra coffee in the morning, which fence needed repairing before winter. She learned that people could disagree without becoming enemies. She learned that mistakes did not always lead to punishment, but one thing remained difficult: believing she belonged. Every evening after work, she packed her few belongings neatly, her shawl folded, her comb placed beside the locket, ready to leave just in case. One night Daniel found her outside the cookhouse repairing an old shirt. "You should be resting." She looked up. "So should you. I own the ranch." And he almost laughed. "And apparently that doesn't excuse me from good advice." A quiet moment passed. The sunset covered the fields in gold. Daniel noticed the wooden locket around her neck. "Your father," Clara touched it. "Yes. Was he a good man?" She smiled faintly. "He tried to be." Daniel nodded. "That's usually how you know someone was." She looked at him. "What about your family?" The question surprised him. Most people didn't ask. "My parents passed years ago. I'm sorry." He shrugged slightly. "I had good memories." Clara looked down. "You're lucky." Daniel watched her carefully. "Why? To have memories worth missing." The sadness in her voice revealed more than the words. For the first time, Daniel understood that Clara wasn't only grieving what she lost. She was grieving what she never had. The next morning, Clara found a wooden box outside her room. Inside were several things: a new pair of work gloves, a warm coat, and a notebook. On the first page, written neatly, "Ranch Supplies, Clara Bennett." She stared at it. When Daniel walked past, she stopped him. "I can't accept this." He looked confused. "Why?" "Because I didn't earn it." Daniel glanced at the box. "The gloves, the notebook." He nodded. "You earn your wages." She looked at the notebook. "Then why my name?" Daniel answered simply. "Because you're the person responsible for keeping those records." Clara swallowed. "You trust me?" Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes, that word was harder to accept than any gift. Trust. She had spent years proving she wasn't useless, but nobody had ever simply believed she wasn't. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at Maple Ridge. It was from Dry Creek. Daniel found Clara holding it outside the cookhouse. Her face had gone pale. "Everything all right?" She folded the letter quickly. "Yes." But he knew better. "What happened?" She hesitated, then handed him the paper. It was from her mother, only 3 sentences. Martha Bennett was returning to town, and she wanted to speak with her daughter. Clara stared toward the distant hills, the place she came from, the place that had given her away. "I don't know why she wants to see me." Daniel remained quiet. "Maybe she needs something. Maybe she wants forgiveness. Maybe." Clara looked at him. "But what if she only wants something from me again?" For the first time since arriving at Maple Ridge, Daniel saw the fear beneath her strength, not fear of her mother, fear of hoping. Because hope was dangerous when disappointment had become familiar. Daniel spoke softly. "Whatever happens, you don't have to face it as the person you were before." Clara looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not the girl standing beside that wagon anymore." The words settled over her because he was right. She had changed, but she still had one question. Could she believe it? Clara did not sleep much the night before returning to Dry Creek, not because she was afraid of seeing her mother. She had already survived the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing that the person who was supposed to choose her first had been the one who let her go. What frightened her was something else. What if she still wanted her mother's approval? What if, after everything, a small part of her still hoped to hear the words she had waited 19 years for? "You matter. You were wanted." I was wrong. That hope embarrassed her. She thought she had grown stronger, but strength, she was learning, did not mean having no wounds. It meant learning how to live without letting those wounds decide everything. Daniel rode beside the wagon as they approached Dry Creek. He did not ask questions. He did not tell her what to say. He simply stayed, and somehow that helped more than advice ever could. When they reached town, Clara noticed people looking. The same people who had watched her stand alone outside the trading post now watched her arrive beside Daniel Mercer. But she was different, not because of the dress she wore. Not because of the better coat on her shoulders, because she no longer walked like she was apologizing for existing. The church bell rang in the distance. The general store stood exactly where she remembered. The trading post stood exactly where she remembered, but somehow they looked smaller. Her mother was waiting outside a small rented room near the edge of town. Martha Bennett looked older, not old, just tired. For a moment neither woman spoke. Clara had imagined this moment many times. She imagined anger, she imagined tears, she imagined saying all the things she had kept buried, but standing there she felt something unexpected. Peace. Her mother looked at Daniel. I suppose you found someone willing to take her in. Clara's expression changed. The old words, the old wound. Daniel remained silent. This was Clara's moment, not his. Clara looked at her mother. No, Martha frowned. No, Clara shook her head. He didn't take me in. A pause. He gave me work. Her mother looked confused. There is a difference. The sentence was quiet. But it carried years of pain. Martha looked away. I was trying to survive. Clara nodded slowly. I know. That answer surprised her mother. You know? Yes. The older woman looked at her. I know you were scared. I know times were hard. I know you lost everything after father died. Clara's voice softened. But I also know I was there. Martha said nothing. I cooked. I cleaned. I worked beside you. Her hands tightened. I wasn't asking for much. A tear appeared in Martha's eyes, but Clara continued. I didn't need you to give me everything. She looked down for a moment. I just wanted you to look at me like I was your daughter. The silence afterward was heavier than any argument. Because there was nothing to defend, nothing to explain, only truth, Martha finally whispered, I thought you would hate me. Clara looked at her. I tried. Her mother looked surprised. I tried to hate you. A small, painful smile crossed Clara's face, but it was easier to miss you. That was the first honest thing either of them had said. Martha covered her mouth. I was wrong. Clara closed her eyes, the words she had waited years for. They finally came, but they did not erase the past. They did not magically repair everything, and strangely, Clara was okay with that because healing did not mean pretending something never hurt. It meant no longer carrying the hurt alone. When Clara returned to Maple Ridge, she felt different. Not healed completely, not magically fearless, but lighter. The next morning she returned to her work. She recorded supplies, helped Mrs. Whittaker, checked the storage room. But Daniel noticed something. She stopped packing her belongings every night. Her shawl stayed folded in the dresser. Her comb remained beside the mirror. The small signs were almost invisible. But he saw them because he understood. A person who has spent years waiting to leave notices the moment they finally stop preparing to run. Winter arrived slowly. Snow covered the fields. The ranch became quieter. The workers gathered near the fireplace after long days outside. One evening, Thomas brought out a guitar. Someone started telling stories. Someone else started laughing. Clara sat near the edge of the room at first. Old habits. Then Mrs. Whittaker pulled a chair closer. You're part of this conversation, you know. Clara smiled. I was listening. We know. The older woman handed her a cup of tea. But you can listen from here. It was a small thing, a chair, a cup of tea, a place by the fire. But Clara understood something. Family was not always created by blood. Sometimes it was created by people who noticed when you were standing alone. Months passed. Spring returned to Maple Ridge. The fields turned green again. The horses grew restless. The ranch became busy, and Clara became someone people depended on, not because they felt sorry for her, because they respected her. When new workers arrived, they asked Daniel who managed the supplies. He would point toward Clara. When someone needed a problem solved, they went to her. When the younger ranch hands needed advice, they listened. The girl who once stood unwanted beside a wagon had become one of the most trusted people on the ranch. One evening, Daniel found Clara repairing a torn ledger cover outside the barn. You know, he said, there are easier ways to fix that. She looked up. Such as buying a new one, she smiled. And waste a perfectly good book, Daniel laughed softly. No, he leaned against the fence. I suppose you wouldn't. A comfortable silence followed. The kind that only exists between people who no longer need to prove anything. Finally, Daniel said, do you still feel like you don't belong here? Clara looked across the ranch, the barn. The fields, the lights glowing from the cookhouse windows, the people who had become her everyday life. She thought carefully. Sometimes, Daniel nodded. She continued. But then I remember something. What? She looked at him. I used to think belonging meant someone choosing you once. She glanced toward the ranch. But I think it means people choosing you again and again. Daniel smiled. That's a wise thing to learn. Clara looked down. I learned it here. That summer, Dry Creek held its annual gathering. The entire town came together. Music, food, stories, children running between tables. Clara attended with the Maple Ridge group. For the first time, she did not stand near the edge. She sat among them, she laughed, she talked, she belonged. A woman from town approached her, the same woman who had watched her leave the trading post months earlier. "I wanted to say something." Clara looked up. The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry." Clara waited. "We all saw what happened." She looked down. "And most of us did nothing." Clara nodded. "I know. Can you forgive us?" Clara thought about that, then smiled gently. "I already did." The woman looked surprised. "Why?" Clara looked across the field toward Daniel and the ranch workers. "Because I learned that people can become better than who they were before." As the sun set behind the hills, Daniel stood beside Clara. The town that once watched her lose everything now watched her laugh with people who cared about her. A young girl ran past carrying flowers. A ranch hand called Daniel over. Someone asked Clara about next year's harvest records. Life continued. Quietly, normally, beautifully, Daniel looked at her. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stayed in Dry Creek that day?" Clara smiled. "I used to, and now," she looked toward Maple Ridge. "I think I would have found my way somewhere." Daniel nodded. "You're right, but," she looked at him, he smiled, "but I'm glad it was here." The answer was simple, no dramatic promises. No perfect ending, just two people standing beneath a fading sky, grateful for the place they had found. Clara Bennett had once been traded away like something with no value. But she discovered something nobody had taught her. A person's worth is never decided by the people who fail to see it. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop, listen, and remind them they were never a burden. They were always someone worth choosing. The end.